Today on Conversation Aloud, we're talking about poverty in the US, what's causing it, what has worked, what doesn't work in tackling it. We're joined by Birjan Crispin, was born in Bulgaria, adopted at the age of 2, and raised in Illinois, where he now focuses on public policy, having previously worked in the Indiana House of Representatives as a legislative aide. Welcome to the show, Birjan.
Hadi, good to be with you. Fan of your work. You've done some really good things. So it's an honor and privilege to sit down with you today.
Great to have you on. Thank you. So, Birjan, let's tell us about your adoption story. How do you think it shaped your worldview growing up in the U.S.?
Sure. So I was born overseas in Bulgaria, like you had mentioned, in 1998. Bulgaria was coming out of the shadow of the Iron Curtain and communism, and they were trying to find themselves as a country and try and step into their own identity. And so a lot of the orphanages in Eastern Europe at the time struggled with abuse, neglect, malnutrition, and that was my story for 2 years. And had it not been for the grace of God, I was adopted in September of 2000 by my parents, Jim and Kim. I grew up in Wheaton, Illinois, suburbs of Chicago, about 40 minutes west of the city. And I grew up in a Christian conservative home, really focusing on conservative ideology, what it means to serve other people and living out our faith. And so those things from a young age really helped spur on what I believe is my vocation and calling to be a catalyst for change in the public arena here in the United States. And I'm looking forward to venturing into that calling. So I have my identity, my background as an orphan and what that means for me. And then also, the giftings and the resources that I've been gifted. And I don't believe, Hadi, that I've been called to just coast in life. I think it's really easy to be complacent with the story of your life. And so I want to make sure that I'm stewarding my time, stewarding my resources, and stewarding my life story well. And so I want to engage in the public arena and do what I can to show that God can use anybody, just like me, an adopted kid from Bulgaria, to be able to serve people in a good way. And it's what I'm looking forward to do.
Nice. And what I get from what you're saying is you have a lot of gratitude and you feel that life is a gift. Has that been kind of installed in you feel, with your foster parents and in your environment, or was there something that happened that allowed you to have that view?
I think first and foremost, life is a gift from God, no matter if you're adopted or if you're born biologically into a regular family. And so I think first and foremost, life is precious in and of itself. But then I do have more appreciation, I think, for where my life could have gone versus where it is now, living in Indiana, serving Hoosiers and serving citizens in the United States nationwide through thoughtful, conservative, biblical ideology. If you're an orphan in Bulgaria, you're kicked out of the orphanage when you turn 18, and about 60 to 70% of orphans don't make it to 18, which is really, really sad in Bulgaria. And then if you do make it out of the orphanage, about 50% end up incarcerated due to alcohol and drug abuse because of the system that they were in. And so I'm incredibly grateful for the providential, caretaking hand of God in my life, and I want to make sure that I steward that well. And so it is both the natural gift of life itself, but it's also my own life story that has made me appreciate where I am today.
Yeah, that's some crazy statistics there. Moving to the U.S. U.S. is one of the richest countries in the world, but surprisingly, it has U.S. poverty rate is around 11.6%, and that equates to around 40 million people living in poverty. Was there a moment you became conscious of poverty, inequality, or the social gaps in the U.S.?
I think living 40 minutes outside of the city of Chicago, we would go into the city as a family and on different things for school. And you would see people asking for money, and you would see that quickly that people not a lot of people, live like you do, and a lot of people have it worse than I did growing up. And so it was eye opening to see that, and really, Hadi, it just broke my heart to see people struggling on a day to day basis, and it made me not want to take the things that I have for granted. And I think our society could do a lot better in terms of being grateful for what we do have, because, like you said, in the United States, about 40 million people live at or below the poverty line. And so it was just seeing those things as a child, and then as I grew up a little bit more, when I was in college, I had the opportunity to write a paper for the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., looking at the behavioral economics of poverty and what causes it, and how to fix it. And from there, I did a deep dive into some statistics and some behaviors of different communities that were struggling with this very issue. And so has been a lifetime of observation, and that's something that I'm passionate about, because I believe everyone should have the chance to succeed, and it is something that needs to be addressed.
So in that paper that you wrote, what did you see as the root cause of poverty in a rich country like the US? Is it like a structural lack of access to things, or is it more lack of personal agency, responsibility, which we hear a lot of people say? What was it for you that you found?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I believe deserves a thoughtful answer. I believe the root cause of poverty in a country as wealthy as the United States, it's multifaceted, but at its core often comes down to a breakdown of personal responsibility, cultural values, individual agency, like you suggested. That's not to ignore structural challenges that do exist, whether that be communities lacking access to quality education, job opportunities, safe neighborhoods, those kind of things. But in many cases, those challenges are compounded and not created by a decline in a strong family structure, the strong family unit, work ethic, and a sense of personal accountability. And so the US is still a place where upward mobility is possible, but we have to be honest, Hadi, about what it takes to succeed. Finishing school, holding a job, avoiding criminal activity, delaying parenthood until you're married, basic steps that can reduce the likelihood of poverty in our communities. And so I believe that government can and should help create conditions for opportunity through policies that promote economic growth, school choice, community investment, but it cannot replace the role of individual decision making and cultural strength within our communities. So ultimately, long-term solutions to poverty, I think, require empowering people to take control of their own lives and not increasing dependence on the state or on the government.
It's interesting. How do you increase agency? Because for a lot of people, there is, of course, there are, I think, a lot of structural issues, and there's always going to be work with improving mobility, as you said, and access to things. But when it comes to agency, the mindset that someone has, it's it's very hard to change that. What have you found that impacts a lot of people's mindset to take that responsibility, and change that view from I'm going to be relying on something outside of me to now I am the person that is responsible for the things that happen in my life. It's a big shift that happens in that mindset. How do you think that occurs usually?
Well, Hadi, you're exactly right. It is a big challenge, and it is a big task, and it is the big question facing our communities today. Are we going to remain victims of victim mentality and feeling sorry for ourselves and just taking a check from the government? Or are we going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and actually try to work hard? And I think you can't solve that problem at the high federal level. That needs to take place in our local communities. And so I think things that we're trying to do here in the United States and in the state of Indiana is working with local charities and organizations and churches that can really get on the ground level of some of these struggling communities and try and reignite the dignity of every single person, and showing them that they do have value, not just as an American, but a value as a contributing member of society, as an individual who's created by God, who has a purpose. And so I think if you can reinstill kind of that purpose in each person and show them that there is something greater beyond themselves that they can partake in, in this country and show them they can contribute and can earn money and can provide for their family, I think we could see some real change. But I think it's often a problem here in the United States that we often like to just put a Band-Aid on things and try and fix it. And this is going to take years and decades of change to change these long patterns of behavior that we've had over the course of decades, really going back to the 1960s when we saw the initiation of President Lyndon Johnson's welfare program, originally intended for good, but has been taken advantage of by those who don't want to work. And so it is a big problem, as you said, but I think we can make progress over time through many years to come by reinstilling the dignity of each person, working at the community and ground level, coming alongside people where they are and helping create jobs in communities and doing the best that we can to stay present with them over time.
It's interesting because, obviously welfare, it's a bigger thing, I feel like, in Europe than the US. At one angle, it helps a lot of the people that are struggling the most in society. And I feel like it does help those people typically. That's its biggest value is helping those in society. And then obviously there's another element to it, which it could easily be taken advantage of, like many other things. And some people do take advantage of that. But it's, do you think it's of benefit to remove those things such as welfare?
I personally would not advocate for, and I think the Conservative Party of the United States does not advocate for, a complete removal of those programs per se. But I do think we should have a slow, general kind of pulling back a little bit on some of those problems. And while we're pulling back some of those programs, doing the best that we can to work on creating economic growth in those communities, making sure that we're taking care of people, but helping them get jobs and that kind of thing, to show them that they don't need to be dependent. Because if you all of a sudden remove those welfare programs, people are going to struggle and the bottom's going to fall out. So that's not the answer. But I think you could see a both and. It's not an either or. You could see a both and, where you could start to slowly kind of roll that stuff back while coming alongside people. And hopefully over time, you'll see a natural less and less dependence on those welfare programs. But I would absolutely not remove it completely, although that would be the goal eventually, right? You would love to see people working hard and doing what they can and earning money and supporting their community, supporting their family. But we just have to look realistically at the cultural moment that we're in and understand that that's not a solution right now. That's a goal for sure, but that's not where we're at right now.
There was a statistic that was very interesting that I saw, which is around 6.3 million Americans in poverty were actually employed full-time, which is very shocking because they are working hard, right, full-time, yet they are still in poverty. Do you think this is, what do you think is causing them? Is it that there isn't enough regulation to allow those companies to pay the right amount to those people? Or what is the issue here, really?
I think there's a couple of issues here. One is that people in the United States generally as a whole are not good with saving money. We're not good with making sure we're putting money aside or investing. We love to spend. And spending is what people like to do. And so the more you spend, the less you save. And I understand that through inflation and through raising taxes and some of these things, that the cost of living is a lot higher across the country. And so you have to spend more money for the basic necessity of life, making it harder to save. So I think there's a couple of solutions or things that we could roll out. One would be to teach people the importance of saving and investing their money to make sure we're not spending everything that we can. Two is I think we need to create economic opportunities to make sure that we're lowering cost of living across the United States, the cost of groceries, housing, vehicles, all that kind of thing. And that's something that we're wrestling through at the federal and the state level, is how does that work? And then I think thirdly, I think you're seeing different organizations that employs a lot of people that are at or below the poverty line. A lot of your fast food chains, things like that, have gotten rid of hiring people because they're they're throwing the minimum wage higher. McDonald's is now at $15 an hour, and so it's more cost effective not to hire if you're McDonald's, rather to just have these machines that you can use. And so there's not enough people working, and so more dependence on these welfare programs. So I think we need to have a better job at teaching financial and fiscal literacy in our schools, in our universities, in our communities. And then we need to create policy that helps lower the cost of living nationwide. And that's something that we've struggled over the 4 past years with the Biden administration, and something that the Trump administration is working hard to do. It hasn't exactly been the smoothest rollout that I think conservatives would have hoped for, but it is something that we're passionate about. We do see the need for, and we're trying to create the best possible solution moving forward.
So what you're saying is the kind of a couple solutions here, which is one, it needs to be community driven. It needs to be on the ground, giving people agency, changing people's mindset, which requires them engaging with the community and shifting that mindset. But in the other end, it's also slowly removing incentives not to work and increasing incentives to work. That's not to say that welfare goes to disincentivizes people, because some people do require that even though they're working. But obviously, a lot of times it is abused, and we see that in our country where there is a lot of abuse around that. The issue for me, it seems like, because you mentioned there, having a minimum wage might be causing some issues there if that's continuing going up. The issue in a capitalist society is that if you let the capitalists decide the wages, i.e. the corporations, they are going to pay the least amount possible. And it seems like even though people are employed, they're still in that poverty, that poverty area. Wouldn't decreasing the minimum wage cause that to increase in terms of the people that are employed that are also in poverty?
So I think a couple of things to that. I think one is that even if if you lower wages, will that increase people living in poverty? Not necessarily, because you've seen over the past 30, 40, 50 years is when minimum wage was lower, the levels of poverty were not as high as they are right now. So I don't think there's a direct correlation there. Even if you do lower wages, or you keep wages the same where they are, you still have the personal responsibility of the employee. And unfortunately, the organizations that people work for, whether you're in corporate America or whether you're working blue-collar jobs, they don't have control over the way that you spend your money as an individual and the way that you value money and do all of those things. And I think it's good to have that separation. In terms of capitalistic organizations setting wages and doing those things, those kind of organizations are going to, they're taking on all the risk of putting in the capital, putting in the investment to start the organization. And so they're going to act in the best interest of the organization while also trying to make sure that they pay a good wage for their employees. And so there needs to be a good balance here. I don't think the option to continue to raise wages is going to be good, because then that makes it more costly for the organization to hire. They won't hire as much, or they'll ship jobs overseas, or they'll automate and all those things, and people will lose jobs. So that's one problem. And if you lower wages to what they were before, you still have the personal agency responsibility of things. So it's all kind of a conglomerated mix of problems. But I don't think that you can just say one thing and let it affect everything else. So we need to address each issue specifically and look at how to fix it and see if we can come up with a better solution holistically.
Yeah. A lot of people argue that really because of this issue of minimum wage, not for some people, they see it as not enough, actually, the minimum wage. And what's happening is that the government has to basically subsidize those corporations by giving out the welfare checks. Even though people are working, they have to receive more support from government, even though they're in full employment, to actually survive in the US, especially now with the cost of living. We've seen, inflation skyrocket after COVID. And so do you not see that if we are trying to reduce welfare, especially for those, I'm aiming here at people who are working really, um, you know, if we're trying to reduce welfare, then shouldn't wages increase so that people don't have to rely on the government? And which means, yeah, minimum wage has to increase really.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to increase wages, it's going to be more costly to the organization. And so, to incentivize the organization to raise wages, they need to be able to create and innovate, which makes the argument for decreased regulation, increased tax incentives for those organizations to be able to create and innovate and do things here in the United States where it may cost a little bit more to make something, but the value is going to be higher. And when profits are higher, you can raise wages and expand and all of those things. And so, I think over the past really 10, 15 years or so, we've seen kind of a stranglehold on businesses and on corporate America. And I think we need to kind of loosen the reins a little bit and allow them to do what they do best, is innovate, is to create jobs and be able to raise wages and all of those things. So I don't think it's specifically about the wage issue, although the wage issue is important and we want people to be able to afford the cost of living. But we also need businesses to need to be able to create and invent things, to be innovative and make things here in the United States. That way we can increase wages and help people get out of that those transgenerational issues of poverty. And so I think it is a mix of all of those things. Again, I think we need to create economic opportunities where we can lower the cost of living across the United States, but it also varies on where people are living. Traditionally, cost of living is higher in the cities, and so you've seen people moving to less populated areas because it's cheaper to live there. And so these are some of the things that I think we need to address, from how do we create and innovate better, how do we decrease regulation on organizations to allow them to thrive and create more profit to increase wages, and then also how do we decrease the cost of living as well. So I think it is multifaceted, but those concerns do exist, and I think they are really important, that I think we need to take a better look at and kind of take the long views. How do we solve some of those problems?
Do you worry about, because you were mentioning their innovation, do you worry about technology, specifically AI, and how that's going to impact people in the US?
I think the concern has always been prevalent since kind of the beginning of the AI generation that we're living in. I think AI does some wonderful things. It needs to be regulated for sure. I do think that with the increase of AI and AI engineering, that we're going to see demand for jobs to be able to help regulate and create those things as well. And they are replacing technology are replacing jobs that existed maybe even just 5 years ago. As I mentioned, you can't drive into a McDonald's now these days without there being maybe one or two people working the counter, as opposed to 5 years ago when there weren't machines there. So we are seeing a change in the way that business is being done and the way that jobs are being created and the types of jobs that are being created and in demand. So I think those are things that we need to evaluate. It's hard to evaluate what their needs are going to be 5, 10 years from now because technology progresses so quickly. But there are things I hope that we can do as a culture, as a society, as legislators, and as a citizenry of the United States to make sure that we're advancing in technology, doing the right things, but also making sure that we're taking care of the individual as well.
Yeah, I'll be honest. My biggest worry is the new technology coming in. We see this with every technology that comes in. It impacts a lot of people. Obviously, a lot of people benefit from it if they can leverage it. Other people, it harms, and I feel like um, there's going to be less need and requirement for employment of people because one person can do five jobs, five people's jobs with the right technology. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the governments respond to such a situation that will be arising. Do you feel like politicians really understand the problem of poverty and are focusing to tackle it?
Hadi, I would love to say yes wholeheartedly. I think that'd be the great, kind of political answer. Honestly speaking, I think there are some politicians who are starting to wake up to see the need to address these issues that we've talked about here today. I think we could do a better job of addressing them. I think we need to do a better job of listening to people on the ground, listening to people who have lost their jobs at emerging technologies, listening to technology regulators. I think we need to do a much better job in terms of how we approach these issues and making sure that we're truly serving the American people. And I think our legislators in DC, while they can do some great things, I think have kind of lost sight of the American public. And I think that's why you've seen a shift politically as well away from the traditional establishment way of doing things on Capitol Hill, and a focus on grassroots level engagement and connecting with the individual and trying to restore communities one community at a time. And I think we're starting to wake up to some of those things, but we have not done a great job over the past 5, 10 years or so. And I think we need to do a better job moving forward.
Do you think the reason why that is because politicians are one of the wealthiest segment of society, and so they might be not understanding the real issues or detached from that reality? I was looking at statistics that said, the 1%, the wealthiest 1% in the U.S. own more wealth than the combined 90%, the bottom 90% in the U.S., which is insane. Do you feel like that's the reason why they're not able to understand it or find real solutions?
I think that's part of it. I think money is a big issue. Money impacts how we do politics in every single aspect, from the campaign to staffing to lobbying organizations and special interest groups. And I think it can be easy for politicians to become detached from the realities on the ground in their communities, which is why you see some incumbents lose their offices and new people come in because they're more connected with the community. So I think that is part of it. I also think we just don't have great education about all that's out there, and it's hard to understand all the emerging technologies that are on the horizon. And so, I would love to see more engagement in our communities. I think people are trying. Certainly here in my home state of Indiana, people are doing a great job of being engaged and listening to stakeholders and crafting good policy to help Hoosiers. And that's something we take pride in as a state here in the Midwest. And other states maybe don't do that as well, like my home state of Illinois. But I can say that, we're trying hard, we're working at it, but there are some issues that our politicians need to wake up to.
What changes have you seen with, I'm just going to go a bit political here. What changes have you seen with Trump really shifting the focus on this issue or similar issues?
I think the Trump administration 2.0 is a lot different than Trump administration 1.0. I think he was just getting his feet wet, didn't really have a good group around him to help him grow and learn and really succeed for the American people. Although we did some great things in Trump term 1.0, from being energy independent, rebuilding our military, closing the border, all of these things that we did really well. But I think you're seeing a much more lasered focus on making sure that America kind of rises out of the ashes of the Biden administration and making sure that we're really serving everyday Americans. And I know there's disagreements as to how we do that, but I think you are seeing a much more structured focus on making sure that we're energy independent again, that we're making sure that we're building and incentivizing manufacturing in the United States to be able to help raise wages like we talked about, and incentivizing foreign investment in the United States. President Trump just went on a trip to the Middle East and secured over $4 billion worth of investment inside the United States. And I think that's been lacking over the past few Democratic administrations. And so I think he's much more focused on that, creating peace in the Middle East. All of these things, I think he realizes the significance of the time that we're in. I think he's much more focused. And so I'm excited about kind of the next 3 years as what that will look like. He has a much better experienced team around him that really cares about the American people. And so I'm excited for what's ahead. There's a lot of work to do, absolutely. But I think our foot is on the gas and we're not letting up because there is so much work to be done to make sure that we keep America great moving forward.
Well, I'll tell you what is worrying me. There are some things that I feel like Trump is doing a good job on. Things like, border, let's say, and things like getting foreign investment. We saw the Middle East trip. The things that are worrying me, there's there's two things really, and I think it touches on this subject, which is poverty. One is the tariffs in terms of increasing the cost of living for people, because usually when you apply tariffs, it's kind of like a consumption tax. It's passed on to the consumer, so prices will increase for the consumer if you import goods. But even if you produce things in the U.S., a lot of those parts to those goods are imported. Taking car, for example, so costs are going to increase because of those tariffs, and then you have this the tax cut bill, which looks good. Obviously, everyone wants a tax cut, but what it does to the debt is, I think, crazy. U.S. debt is at 36 trillion. The deficit is huge, and there seems to be no stop to that debt ceiling. And are you not worried that people are going to have less confidence in giving money to the U.S. if they feel like there is no budget fiscal responsibility at all? And how will the U.S. end up affording things if the interest on that debt continues to increase and eat at that budget? So there's two parts. There's the tariffs increasing costs, and then there's the budget being consumed by this interest to service the debt, which seems to be continuously increasing, which will be put on steroids with that tax bill.
Yeah, so we'll take those one at a time. First, the tariff policy. Those tariffs are not meant to be long-term answers. I think President Trump kind of jumped the gun a little bit on these tariffs. Honestly speaking, I'm all for using tariffs as leverage policy to making sure that other countries are paying their fair share. The United States subsidizes the defense of most of Europe, and we've been taken advantage of in the trade world for quite some time. And so he wanted to make sure that countries are paying their fair share and people are building and manufacturing in the United States. And if not, then we're going to put a tariff on them. And while I think those are good in the short term for leverage purposes and to making sure that we have an equal playing field and everyone can come to the table, I don't think they're the right answer long term, because they do, as you suggested, Hadi, pass down the cost to the consumers, increasing the cost of things from cars to groceries to tech products, those kind of things. And so he did put a pause on those. It'll be interesting to see where that goes from here. But I think you do speak to the concerns of millions of Americans that struggle with what these tariffs are actually for. And so point well taken there. It is something that we're working on here and making sure that we're addressing these issues. And I think we're going to see a change in the tariff policy moving forward. When it comes to spending and this great, big, beautiful bill, as was just passed last week in a midnight voting session by one vote, it will increase to the national debt, and that's why two conservatives voted no, because they didn't want to increase the debt. There are a lot of good things in that bill, from shoring up the border to defunding Planned Parenthood, to a lot of different things, the extending the Trump tax cuts to make sure that citizens and corporations are incentivized to grow, manufacture, and spend here in the United States. Lots of good things there, but it does add to the debt ceiling, as you mentioned. For the first time in our history as a country, the past 250 years as a nation, Moody's downgraded our credit rating from a AAA. And so I think that put the rest of the world on notice. It's been a problem for a long time now. I don't have the answer here today. I wish I did for you on your show. That'd be great if you could break the news here. But unfortunately, I don't have the answer. But we do need to save money, incentivize growth, making sure that we're spending in the United States, and also trimming costly expenditures and waste, which is why in this big, beautiful American bill, we are targeting fraud, waste, and abuse from Doge, and all of those things. We're poised to cut over $2.1 trillion this year alone in spending. But with the debt of 36, almost 37 trillion, it seems inconsequential. but we are working hard to address this issue, and it is something that future legislators and communities are going to need to think of as we move forward here in the years to come.
Didn't the House reject the Doge recommendations?
They did because the House wanted some extra provisions in there that Doge did not have in there, so they wanted to cut some of those things, and it's understandable. Just the basic idea, coming into committee, it's not going to come out of committee the same way that it went in. The Senate's going to make some changes that the House may have to rework some things, and so they did want to change some things. But all in all, I think we've put together a pretty good package for the American people. But it does mean spending money, and it's kind of a catch-22. So that's something that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are jumping all over and making sure that the American people know how much we're adding to the national debt as well. The Biden administration and Obama terms 1 and 2 did the same thing, but I think we just have such more focus on the national debt. Every president has added to the national debt. It's not just a Trump thing. It goes between both parties. So.
Yeah, it seems like no one's getting the message that this cannot continue like that. Just on the tariffs point you mentioned there, obviously tariffs can be a good strategy to put some pressure. Although we're getting mixed signals on whether he wants it as a permanent thing to shore up the receipts from the government from taxes, or whether it's just a leverage strategy. But the interesting thing that I see is that if you want to increase manufacturing, obviously that takes time to do. It takes years. And to straight away apply tariffs without kind of preparing the base for the manufacturing, I think is an interesting strategy. But at the same time, from what we learned from the UK-US deal, and I think there was another deal or not. Oh, no, the UK was the first one, that tariffs are going to stay or increase, from pre-Liberation Day, but they're not going to be as high as expected, which means it's still going to increase costs for consumers. I don't know what that will be in the future, but it seems to be all very quick, in a hurry, without kind of the structure to allow the strategy to work in terms of manufacturing, which means that we're not going to see the jobs come back as we would expect, because that takes years for the machinery and the plants all to kind of be built here, really. Do you see it differently?
Well, I think that those deals like the US-UK deal. US just announced a deal with China as well to lower tariffs on China. I think the Trump administration is very reactionary in terms of putting a tariff out there, seeing how other countries react, how it affects the markets, and then changing and reacting to that. And so I think those are good things, but I think it's also hard to plan for 10, 15, 20 years down the road, because we don't know what the economic climate is going to look like then. We don't know what the markets are going to look like then. So what we can do is we can pass these tax cuts to know that organizations that move to the United States have tax incentives to do so, can create and innovate and create jobs. We know that we can secure foreign investment. So we do know that jobs will come. We don't know at what rate yet. So I think we can choose to be pessimistic. We can choose to be optimistic. And I think within the first 100, 150 days now, the Trump administration 2.0, I think we have reasons to be optimistic, but a little bit cautious as well for some of those very reasons that you mentioned. But I am hopeful that these deals that are being announced, the way that the Trump administration and Secretary of State Marco Rubio are working on the international stage to advertise the United States as a great place to do business, I think will bode for good things to come. But it's going to take future generations and future administrations to continue this, because you're right, things could be different in 4, 8, 10 years, 12 years from now. And we just don't know what that looks like. But for now, I'm choosing to be hopeful, choosing to be optimistic, and only time will tell.
Fair enough. Going back to kind of poverty, what do traditional kind of poverty programs, or why do traditional poverty programs often fail to create the long-term change? One you mentioned is is giving them agency, which is a big part of it. Is there anything else that you feel why these programs don't work as they say they do?
Yeah, I mean, I think traditional anti-poverty programs like welfare system fail to create long-term change. They tend to focus on treating symptoms of poverty rather than kind of addressing some of those root causes. So while well-intentioned, I think many of these programs are built around kind of a one-size-fits-all government solutions. I think, and that oftentimes they prioritize short-term assistance over long-term empowerment, kind of putting the Band-Aid on something instead of actually fixing the issue at its core. I think they can inadvertently also create cycles of dependency, like we talked about, discouraging work. Do you know that today it's more, you can earn more money standing on the side of the road asking for money and collecting a welfare check than what you can making minimum wage. So people are de-incentivized to work. It creates cycles of decreased dependency or personal responsibility, that is, and just the development of skills that lead to independence and upward mobility. And so I think that conservatives, I think we believe that the most effective way to break some of the cycles of poverty, I think we need to foster a culture of opportunity through strong families, quality education, instilling meaningful work in our communities, and increasing community-based support. We know that people just don't need a check. They need a chance. And so that means reforming welfare to reward work, incentivizing job training, promoting school choice, strengthening faith-based and local organizations that actually know their communities best, kind of on that grassroots level. And so I think ultimately the goal should be to help people not just get by, but to thrive, to restore dignity, purpose, and hope in our communities. And so I think long-term change comes when we empower the individual and not just when we expand bureaucracy.
Interesting. If you had, the president's ear right now, what would you tell him when it comes to this subject of tackling poverty and giving more agency to people?
I would say, one, we need to loosen the reins on faith-based organizations and charities and make it easier for them to work in those environments and in their own communities. There's oftentimes kind of a stranglehold on bureaucracy and what they can and cannot do. And I think these organizations and people have the most power in their own communities. So decreasing regulation there. I think we also need to incentivize companies to grow in areas of our country that demonstrate high rates of poverty. And allowing individuals to work in those organizations and do the work there in those communities instead of either shipping overseas or staying on the coast. I would love to see some more investment in the Midwest and some of our struggling communities. I think those are two big things. I would also just tell them as well and just reemphasize the importance of reinstilling personal dignity and making sure that people know that there's a purpose beyond just trying to get by and that we're made for more than that as Americans and as individuals. We want to be a meritocracy where if you work hard, want to provide for your family, you should be able to do so. And so we need to create programs that help people do that and incentivize growth for generations to come. So those are just a few of the things that I would tell them.
Just on the last point, kind of, you said there create programs and incentivize growth. What kind of programs do you think would really work here?
Yeah, I think, when we look at the history of anti-poverty policy in the United States, kind of the pivotal moment was, like I said, President Johnson's launch of the War on Poverty in the 1960s. The intention was to lift Americans out of hardship and equal opportunity. But over time, many of the welfare programs kind of lost sight of that mission. And so I think rather than serving as a temporary bridge to self-sufficiency, the programs too often became permanent lifelines, trapping multiple generations in dependency, as we've talked about. So I think what we've learned that when aid isn't tied to outcomes like work, education, and personal achievement, we've learned that it can unintentionally also discourage the very behaviors that lead people out of poverty. And so to answer your question, I think the most successful programs are those that empower people, not just support them. I think policies that promote work requirements, expanding school choice, investing in vocational and skills training, supporting strong families that tend to produce real lasting change. I think, for example, the notion of these welfare to work reforms came up in the 1990s. It helped millions of people move from government assistance into the workforce, restoring not just income, but also dignity and purpose. Charter schools and education savings accounts are great programs that have given families, especially in underserved areas, access to better education and brighter futures. And community-based programs as well, like those rooted in faith and local leadership, often reach people in ways that simply the federal government can't because they're on the ground. And so I think that the path out of generational poverty isn't through bigger government. I think it's through renewed opportunity. And I think this means creating an economy that rewards hard work, supporting families as the foundation of society, and restoring a culture that believes in the God given individual's potential. I think there's so much hope that when we focus on lifting people up, not just holding them in place. And I think the good news is that when we get the policy right, we have to get it right. But when we get the policy right, we've seen that people can thrive. And so that's something that I continue to hope to advocate for. And I think that something as we can look forward to as a nation.
Interesting. You mentioned their welfare to work. What's that?
The welfare to work program was essentially creating economic programs that help people go from being in a state of welfare and dependency to working. So welfare to work. And that was brought on by the Clinton administration. It was actually the last administration to balance the federal debt and balance the federal books. And so it helped people move from being dependent on welfare out of the 60s, 70s, 80s into the 90s and into a stronger workforce. And we saw some things that worked there and things that I think we can emulate again.
Yeah. A lot of people talk about a guaranteed or universal, what do they call it? Universal basic income. I'm assuming you think that would be a terrible idea.
I do, because where's that money going to come from? We can't just keep printing money. It's going to decrease the value of the dollar. And the value of the dollar is already decreasing around the world. Our credit rating is decreasing. And so I don't want to see universal basic income because then again, it would de-incentivize work. I'd love to see, like I said, some rollback of assistance, but also making sure that we're still helping people that need help, not just people that want a paycheck and don't have to work.
Yeah. Just kind of exploring this a bit. Imagine a time where where humans don't really need to work to generate income because we have robots and technology doing a lot of the work. And so the wealth is redistributed in that way, in terms of we've got a few that hold all the assets and they hold all the technology, and everything is created without the need of humans to actually produce those things. Do you think that is, and bringing in faith over here, do you think that will be a huge loss of meaning for people, or do you think people will actually have more time to do faith-based activities because there isn't that need now to work the whole day to generate income?
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition, Hadi. We're not there yet. I don't know if we ever will be. I think there will always be work to do, and I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. You can work hard and still be engaged in faith-based communities and organizations. I think people too oftentimes put their meaning and their identity in their work and who they are as an individual instead of who God created them to be. And I think once we lose the purpose of kind of what we're meant to be on a bigger level, we put our identity in who we are, in our jobs, and the amount of money that we can make, and status, and those kind of things. And those things fade over time. And so when you retire, when you're not working anymore, kind of what's left, and you see people struggling with mental health or anxiety or a lot of those things as a result of kind of this identity struggle. And so while that may happen a long time down the road, I think what's most important is we need to focus on the here and now, and how do we continue to help people reinstill the dignity and purpose of each individual, of each community, and doing what we can to promote growth across the country.
Very interesting, Birjan. That was thank you for sharing all that. If people wanted to reach out to you, or speak to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can go to birjancrispin.com, birjancrispin.com. We can put that link in the description, birjancrispin.com. And then on Instagram, Birjan Crispin 98, Birjan Crispin 98. So those are two great ways to find me. I would love to engage with your audience, continue the discussion further. These are great things to discuss, really important. And I'm glad, Hadi, that you are addressing these things. More people need to do so. And it was a pleasure and a privilege to walk through these things with you.
It was a pleasure speaking to you. And I'll put the contact information in the show notes. Birjan, thank you so much for your time here.
Thank you.